As the tension that we all experience to some extent, that gap between where we are now and who we are now and happiness. I think we've all experienced that tension in different ways over the last couple of years especially. If you speak to the people around you, how many of us are in a place where we are desperate for happiness right now? Where we're in a place where life has kind of just been in the same rut and we're in need of some happiness. And I think this morning, maybe to start off, if we just acknowledge what we've been through over the last 2 years. As humanity, you look at what's going on around the world at the moment, and this world is in need of happiness, isn't it? You look at what we've been through as a country, the division just in the last year in our country, and we're in need of some happiness. And we look at our own lives, and just like they illustrated this morning, there are so many things that we still want to fix, still want to change, but happiness always seems to elude us. It's into this space that Jesus speaks, and he actually speaks about happiness. And if you were here the first couple of weeks, Wes spoke incredibly well about this passage in the Bible where Jesus actually communicates what does it take to be happy. And so in week 1, Wes spoke about how being blessed, and Wes explained how the word blessed is really the same as happy in the original Greek, how to be happy we must become poor in spirit. And he spoke about acknowledging our need for God, for community, for people around us. Week 2, if you were here last week, Wes spoke so powerfully and so vulnerably about those times that we mourn, those times that we go through things that actually we're wrestling through, and how during those times God is so incredibly close to us, and how our pain and our hurt actually brings us closer to each other. And so this morning, we're going to speak about the third one, as Jesus I see it as kind of this path that Jesus illuminates with these different stops towards happiness. And the third stop on this journey is this one. Jesus speaks and he says, blessed or blessed are the humble. The humble, happy are the humble, for they will inherit the earth. Now, in some translations, the word humble the word meek is used instead of the word humble. Some translations use the word gentle, but most of them say happy, blessed are the humble. Now, I have to be honest with you, when I started thinking what to share today, the very first thought that came to my mind was this, that I don't know if we struggle with humility as a culture. I remember when I moved to New Zealand, I remember thinking this is such a humble culture. Like, I feel like people are really humble. And then I thought about our community, and I thought, do we really struggle with humility that much? That was my first thought, and that probably should have been the first red flag, because if we think we're humble, then maybe we're not as humble as we think we are. But then the second one was this checklist that I found that a guy called Jose Maria made for himself to kind of check in on how he is doing in terms of humility. And in our very humble culture, maybe you can have a look and see if any of this you think applies to us individually or as a culture. He says the first way he knows he's not as humble as he thinks he is when we spend lots of time thinking about what others are thinking of you. It's C.S. Lewis that famously said, humility is not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less. And how much time do we spend thinking about ourselves and what others are thinking of us? The second one, he said, is getting upset when others don't behave the way you expect them to. You know, this desire for God and life and circumstances to meet our expectations because, number 3, we are wanting to get our own way. And at the root of that is this belief that our way, our opinion, our expectation is somehow superior to reality. The fourth one, he says, thinking that what you do or say is better than what others do or say. And that links to the next one, which says giving your opinion without being asked for it. I'm glad there are some chuckles because I read through this and I was like, I didn't think I'm doing that well. But this fifth one, isn't at the root of that this belief that somehow our opinion is so valuable that the other person's life will be worse off not having heard our well-formed opinion? It's a lack of humility, it's pride. Number 6, mentioning yourself as an example in conversation. You know how we just kind of slide that time we did something good into conversation, hoping no one would notice? That is a lack of humility. Number 7, speaking badly about yourself so that they may form a good opinion of you or even better, contradict you. So I said to you how when I moved to New Zealand, I really thought everyone was really humble. But this is one that I see all the time, how we speak badly about ourselves so that other people may form a good opinion of us. Number 8, a reluctance to carry out menial tasks. If you think you're doing okay with humility, just wait till your boss or your manager asks you to clean the bathrooms and see what emotions come to mind. The last slide, it says being upset that others are held in greater esteem than you. Number 10, seeking or wanting to be singled out or receive credit. Number 11, dropping words of self-praise or words that might show your honesty, your wit, or your skill. I don't know about you guys, but maybe we're not as humble as we thought we were. Lance this week, he spoke about this narcissism epidemic that we're actually living through, that they've studied, and how actually, especially in the West, traits of narcissism has actually increased massively. There is an obsession with self in our culture, with our own goals, with our own happiness, and how we are perceived by others. And at the heart of it all is this desire to soothe our egos. And then just lastly, and then I promise I'm going to move on before we all feel too bad about ourselves. As a culture, we have actually moved away. I read this interesting observation by a guy called Ryan Holiday, if we go to the next slide, how as a culture we have largely removed words that indicate events outside of our control from our vocabulary. So he spoke about how 100 years ago, the word fate used to be a very common word in writing and in language. And we've kind of removed that from our vocabulary. He spoke about how some of the US presidents, I think it was George Washington, that actually after he put everything into the American Revolution, he wrote and he said, "This is now in God's hands." It was Eisenhower who, on the eve of one of the biggest battles of his life, he wrote everything that they had done and prepared, and then he said, "This is now in the lap of the gods." And people used to write, letters used to be signed, "Deo volente," God willing. And all these words indicate how circumstances are often beyond our control. Yet within our culture, we have kind of come to believe that we largely control the destiny of our own lives. And that is only humility. If we spoke about the word meekness, that's often used as well, you don't need a checklist to realize what our culture thinks of the word meekness. When last have you heard a leader or someone say, "I'm striving to become more and more meek"? No, as a culture, we've mistaken meekness for weakness. And so I think at the very least, as we speak about humility, we would do well to at least acknowledge that maybe we are not as humble as we think we are. And the second thing that I think is important to realize is that this lack of humility is actually costing us our happiness. If we went through that checklist again, Loki, just at the start, we won't do it, but if we went through every single one of these, we could make a strong case for each one of these actually undermining our own happiness. Like if we spend lots of time thinking what others are thinking of us, it is costing us our happiness and our joy. And we can go through all of them. But actually this link that Jesus made between humility and happiness is real. Our pride is actually costing us our happiness. So maybe we're not as humble as we think we are, and maybe this lack of humility is costing us happiness. So we have these two things, humility and happiness. And I think we tend to value both of these things, don't we? I think there's an understanding that, especially with humility, if you had someone that pursued humility with their whole life and they constantly just spoke about how humble they are and how to become more humble, there's an understanding that that person would actually probably not be the most humble person that you meet, right? And yet with happiness, we've taken a very different approach. We spoke about how the Google searches for happiness have actually increased massively over the last 10, 15 years. We now have fields of studies dedicated to happiness. And just like the song at the start, how common is it to hear someone say, "My goal in life is to be happy"? Now, researchers have studied this lots, and what they have found is what they call the paradox of happiness, which essentially is this, that the people in their studies that have pursued happiness the most and made this the biggest goal of their life actually became less happy. There was a famous study that was done that actually found that the people who made happiness their biggest goal actually became more depressed. And so what these researchers then, they were trying to come up with a solution. How do we become more happy if just aiming for more happiness is not the answer? And so what they kind of came up with is this idea, this metaphor that they used of sunlight. So if you were to stare at the sun directly, it would hurt your eyes, right? However, if you were to enjoy sunlight that you see around us, the indirect effect of sunlight, and you saw the flowers and the mountains and the rainbows, then you could actually enjoy sunlight. But sunlight is best enjoyed indirectly rather than pursued directly. And so they then applied the same idea to happiness. And in their studies, they found three things that the happiest people in the world did. Three things that these elements, they use the word constituents, these things that make up sunlight, these three things make up happiness. And so the first one that they found was that the happiest people in the world contribute. They find a place where they've got something to add. It's this idea of giving, of serving, of actually giving who you are and what you have for a cause that's bigger than yourself. So the happiest people are the ones that contribute, that serve, that give. The second thing they found, the happiest people in the world grow. They are experiencing growth. They are learning. They are asking questions. They are deeply engaging with material or with people around them that are causing them to grow. The happiest people, they don't stagnate. They don't stay in one place. They grow. And then the last thing, the happiest people are the ones that learn to let go. They are the ones that don't sweat the small stuff. They are the ones that learn to forgive and let go of hurt, that let go of past events. They are the people that practice acceptance in their life, letting go of the things outside of their control. They are the ones that practice gratitude. that are thankful for the things they have and not focusing on the things they don't. The happiest people in the world are the ones that contribute, that grow, and that learn to let go. And so, what about humility? What are the things that make us humble? What are the constituents? What are the elements of humility that if we pursued these elements, we would become more humble? And according to Jesus, as a consequence, we would become more happy. Now, I figured seeing that Jesus was the one that not invited us into a life of humility, maybe he can give the answer. Maybe the life of Jesus can show some ideas on what are these elements that we can pursue to make us more humble. So the first thing and there are only three things, and the first, well, there are probably more. We're only going to go through three things that Jesus did to cultivate humility was that he lived with a desire to serve. Jesus was actually asked, and he shared his purpose in life. The thing that he came to do was this. He said, I am here to serve, not to be served. Paul writes this incredible chapter about the mindset that Jesus had towards serving, the meaning and purpose Jesus found in it. And this is parts of what he wrote. If we go to the next slide. He said this, he said, in your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus. And then he goes on to explain what mindset Jesus had towards serving. He said, Jesus, who being in the very nature God, did not consider equality with God as something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking on the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross, and therefore God exalted him. Just before that, he writes and he says this, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but rather in humility value others above yourself, not looking to your own interest, but each of you to the interest of others. Have you thought about if each one of us looked in this community, in this room, looked to the interest of others, there would be no need for us to always be so preoccupied with our own interest, because someone else, 50, 100 other people would be looking out for our interest. And then he wraps this up and he says, so if you want to cultivate this mindset that Jesus had, he said, do everything without grumbling or arguing, so that you may become blameless and pure. And I love the way he ends this. He says, then this is so rare to find that if you cultivate this mindset, then you will shine among this generation like stars in the sky. You will shine in this community. You will shine in your family like stars in the sky. See, I love that one verse in this chapter, if we go to the next slide. Because, see, we spoke about meekness at the start. I think Jesus models for us the difference between meekness and weakness. Weakness is when we have no power. We've got no power over a situation. Maybe we've given away that power to someone or to something. That's weakness. Meekness is different. Meekness is having that power, but choosing to exercise it not in our own interests, but in the interests of those around us. This is how Jesus did it. It says, Jesus, being in the very nature God, he had equality with God. He had the power, and yet he used it not to his own advantage, but to love and to serve and to give. So the first thing Jesus does is he cultivates this desire to serve. The second thing Jesus shows us is a posture of learning. Now, I honestly believe that if we had this approach to every relationship, every person, every circumstance we engage with, we will become more humble. It is this mindset that says, I have more to learn than I have to teach. See, how often do we speak to someone and we think, actually, they're quite old, maybe they can't remember what it's like living when they were my age, or maybe they don't know what it's like living in my situation, and we think, oh, I'll just figure this out. And then we meet someone younger and we think, well, they haven't lived through what I've lived through, so I'll just figure this out. And we speak to a Jesus follower and we think, well, sometimes they can be a bit judgmental, so I'll just figure this out. And we speak to a non-Jesus follower and we think, well, they don't really believe in God, so I'll just figure this out. And we go through life interacting with people, not using opportunities to learn because we believe that we've kind of got it together. When really humility says in every moment, in every interaction, in every circumstance, I have more to learn than I have to teach. Now, one thing I just want to say about this is it doesn't mean we don't have something to teach. Jesus himself was the master teacher. Humility, again, it's not weakness, because sometimes we can also convince ourselves that we don't have anything to teach, whereas this is saying, no, I have something valuable to add. I have something to contribute. It's just saying, I'm gonna listen before I speak. I'm gonna listen with compassion and not with judgment. I have more to learn than I have to teach. And then one of my favorite examples of that, this posture of learning, was this moment where Jesus meets a blind man, and this man walks up to him, and everyone around assumed that clearly this man's biggest need was the fact that he couldn't see. But Jesus doesn't make that assumption. Jesus approaches him and he says, "What do you want me to do for you?" I love that, because he doesn't assume, he doesn't impose himself. He says, "What do you want?" And he listens and he learns before he teaches and he gives. And then the last thing that Jesus shows us is an attitude of surrender. An attitude of surrender. Now, I want to tell you a little story of what happened after I take Eliana's tape off. It happened last year, and it was this moment where I did something that I'd never done before in my life. I went shopping for room decor things, which I had never done before. So for a long time, I had two things in my room. I had a bed and a bedside table, and that was my room, and I loved it. I loved the simplicity of it. I loved the fact that there was no clutter. I loved the fact that everything had a purpose. And then I read this book chapter that actually challenged me, and it said, make one room in your house as beautiful as you possibly can. And it spoke about what that does for your soul. So I thought I'd try it, but I was never going to try it by myself. So I asked Megan to come with me. So Megan's my girlfriend, and she was very kind in the shops. She was patient. She had some good ideas. I was very good at shooting down those ideas. It wasn't a great time, but we were in the shops and we were trying to figure out I was trying to figure it out. She already had it figured out. But she showed me some things. She showed me like a black piece of bedding duvet thing, and I wasn't convinced by that. And so I said, "No, I don't think so." And so we keep going, and I don't know about you guys, but I've got like a limit, a threshold, and it's in the shops, and it's not very high. So I've got about an hour and a half in me, and then after that, I just don't become the best version of myself, really. I get hungry, I get cranky, I get agitated. It's not a good time. So we were kind of reaching that point, right? And I knew something had to give, because we still hadn't bought anything. So Megan still had this vision in her head, and I just didn't buy into it. And then it got to the point where I said to her, "Look, this is not working. You know what? You do what you think, you get what you think I need. Like, put whatever you want in the trolley. I'll swipe the card at the end, all right?" And it can be dangerous, but we were shopping in Kmart and Warehouse, so I think I was right. But and so I said, "You get whatever you think we need." And she got it, and we went home, and it was good. And then we went home, and she kind of put it all together. And the first thing that I loved, by the way, was that everything got used. There was nothing extra, nothing was wasted. And we didn't have to go back to the shop to return things, which I was very happy about. But the thing I loved most was the room. And actually, now it's pretty much a year later, and every time I walk into my room, I love it. I love the feeling of it. It's filled with cool things. I've got like, I was going to take photos, but I thought it'd be weird if I put photos of my room up there. But it was like, it's got these little shelves, and there's a plant, three, actually, I've got 3 plants in my room. There's a photo frame. There's even like a hand sculpture thing, which obviously the only reason you have a hand sculpture is just for the look of it. You know, it's got no practical purpose, but I love it. And my bed is awesome now. I've got like, it's not a duvet, but it's not a blanket. It's like something in between. I don't know. There's a word for it. I just can't remember what it is. But it's like, it's cool. I think it's edgy. And so, and then my pillows. So I never thought as a single man I would have more than the pillow that I slept on. But I've got a single bed, and I've got 5 pillows on it. And 2 of those pillows are actually those big square pillows as well, which I think is like a cool thing to have. And then it's the pillows I sleep on. And then there's a cushion. But this is going to blow your mind. So the cushion actually matches the blanket at the bottom of the bed, but it doesn't match it in color. It matches it in texture, which I really didn't even know was a thing. But so my room has got like a color coordination going and like a texture coordination. So yeah, I thought that was pretty cool. That was the clincher. But I walk into my room now and I love it. But there was that moment where I didn't see the bigger picture, and I had to surrender. I had to let go and just trust. And obviously this is not that big a deal. But for Jesus it was, because Jesus had that same moment, and the stakes were a little bit higher than a room. There was that moment before Jesus ended up giving his life. And it was a moment of agony where he was wrestling with what he was about to go through. It said he was sweating blood. He was in anguish. And he prays this prayer and he says, God, please take this cup away from me. Please change my circumstances. And I don't know about you, but often in my life I've prayed for God to change some circumstances. Maybe you're going through things that are really difficult right now, and you are praying for God to change those circumstances. Maybe it's for you, or maybe it's for a loved one. And then Jesus continues his prayer and he says, and yet, God, please take this away from me. Please change my circumstances, but yet not my will, but yours be done. Paul actually prayed a similar prayer, but he explained it this way. He said, the picture that he has, the way things are supposed to work, is kind of like a mirror. But the thing about the mirror is we always feel like we have the full picture, don't we? Like when we think about our circumstances, it always feels like we've got the full picture, and why can't God get on board with our timing, with our picture, with our ideal? And Paul said this, he said, in those moments, it takes humility to believe that what we have right now is not the full picture. It is these pieces of a mirror. It is these shards of glass. And we are trying to piece together a picture in our lives. But it takes an awful lot of humility to acknowledge and realize that my picture of how things are supposed to work is not that picture that I think it is. It is this. It is pieces of a puzzle. And what God is inviting us into is a place where we join Jesus and we say, you know what, God, I I experience suffering. I experience heartache in my life, but I trust that your picture is bigger than mine. I see the suffering in this world, and I question, how can a good God allow these things to happen? And yet I trust that your picture is bigger than mine. I trust by praying that not my will, but yours be done. And so we have these two things, humility and happiness. And you know what the really cool thing about it is? It's the path to both is actually very similar. Because according to modern research, the path to happiness is by contributing. When Jesus already modeled to us what it looked like to contribute, to serve, to love, to give. Modern research tells us that the path to happiness is growth, is having a mindset that wants to learn. And Jesus already modeled to us that I've got more to learn than I've got to teach. And research tells us that the path to happiness is by letting go. And Jesus showed us how to let go, how to surrender. And so this morning, as you navigate whatever's going on in your life, Jesus makes us a promise, and he says that when we become more humble, we will become more happy. And there are many different ways to do it, but I think at least this is a start. This is a start. And again, Wes always shares it, but this is not rocket science. This is not new ideas, but it's how we implement and how we put this into practice that'll determine how happy our life is. And so to end today, I want to end with the prayer. But instead of praying it, I found a prayer that I just loved that I want to read out to you. And it's just this really simple, really sincere prayer of humility. And so you're welcome to close your eyes. You're welcome to read on the screen, whatever you feel like doing. And if this is the prayer of your heart, just pray it with me, even inside your head. And we'll just close with this prayer of humility. Oh Jesus, meek and humble of heart, from the desire of being admired, deliver me. From the desire of being honored, from the desire of being praised, from the desire of being preferred to others, deliver me. Deliver me, Jesus, from the fear of being humiliated, from the fear of being despised, from the fear of being forgotten, and from the fear of being wronged. Jesus, grant me the grace to be able to desire that others may be admired more than I, that in the opinion of the world, others may increase and I may decrease, that others may be praised and I go unnoticed, that others may be chosen and I set aside. O Jesus, meek and humble of heart, please make me more like you.
I'm Ayla, I'm 26 and my interests include spending time with friends and family, going to the beach, crafts, gardening and reading. I first came to Gracegate when my partner started in the supported living program almost 2 years ago, and I'm now part of the team for children's ministry. I think to get an idea of who I am, it's really important to start at the very beginning. I was an IVF baby and so very loved and fought for from the get-go. But unfortunately, when my mum was 8 months pregnant with me, she was diagnosed with breast cancer and I was born via C-section. It's my understanding that she was given all the appropriate treatment very quickly. She went into remission and all was well for a couple of years, but a few months before I turned 3, they found out it had come back and taken over. We lost her a month after my 3rd birthday, and I think this could really be where my relationship with God began. I was always told she was sleeping forever and in heaven. From a young age, some connection and comfort was there without much understanding. My home life in the years following wasn't always the most healthy situation and often toxic with a particular member of my household. There was a lot of negative talk, both aimed at me from the outside but also internally, and honestly I really struggled growing up. I didn't grow up in a Christian home but was always free to choose what I believed in. In my younger years, my auntie and uncle, who are probably here today, would pick me up and take me to Sunday school. Fast forward a few more years and I became part of a youth group, which was amazing and some of my best memories. We did camps, so many fun activities, and this also gave me the opportunity to go on a mission trip to Cambodia. My life hasn't been without God, but I didn't actively seek Him out or try to grow in my relationship with Him for a long time. I love what Shay says about putting Him in a box and locking it, yet He still gently knocks to remind you He is there, and I can definitely relate to that. Throughout my life, no matter what I was going through or the pain I felt, I never truly felt alone and always knew God was there. Almost as if believing in God has always been an instinct to me, if I realised it or not. Honestly, I never usually know what they are, but I've always believed everything happens for a reason. I think that as much as Harley coming into supported living was about saving his life and him finding recovery, it was just as much about me finding my place at Gracegate and really starting my faith journey. My first interaction with Gracegate was a phone call I had with John inquiring about the supported living program for Harley. I had so many questions and John patiently answered them all. Looking back now, I find it quite funny and realise I was lucky to pin him down long enough for him to answer them all. The one thing that still strikes me about that conversation though is when he mentioned no perfect people allowed and you don't need to believe to belong. I can't count how many times I've heard those words since being part of this community, but I instantly felt at ease. My perception of what churches can sometimes feel like was broken down, and it was another moment where God was knocking. It's been nearly 2 years since then and my life has changed dramatically. I found my own kind of recovery. I am and forever will be healing and growing in my identity in Christ, and I can say that I trust His plan for me. I am far more excited to see what He can do through me than what I could ever do on my own. I've found amazing, kind-hearted and generous people to surround myself with, who encourage and inspire me in my journey with God, and I feel incredibly blessed to have joined the team here. Had you have told me 2.5 years ago this would be my life, I can almost assure you I would have laughed in your face. My life was in a very different place. I did not consider myself good or worthy enough, and could never have imagined I'd be this confident in who I am or in my faith. The people I want to thank are my family for giving me the freedom of choice, my auntie and uncle who have such a strong faith to look up to, John for doing God's work and being the most selfless person I know, Shay for always being there and holding space for me, and of course everyone at Gracegate who makes this community what it is. Getting baptised seems so out of reach for me, but a conversation I had reminded me that I do not need to do anything other than continue to work on believing in Him always, that He is our Father and I can go to Him with anything. When I compare the relationship I have with Him to one that a young child has with their dad, it really simplifies it. I would encourage anyone who is wanting to take that next step to let go of the expectations we have in ourselves and just trust Him. God has known who I am all along. I do not need to be perfect or know everything, but what's important is knowing who I am in Him. What started about 3 months ago as a leap of faith has morphed from a decision to wake up every day, choosing to believe in God, into something so strong and comforting. I could not feel more privileged to be where I am today, and for that reason, I have decided to go public with my faith because I believe that Jesus Christ is my Lord and Saviour. I'm taking this next step in my faith journey and want everyone to know who He is and why this is important to me.
There's a round of applause. Wow. I remember the first time Ayla spoke to me 3 months ago about starting the journey of Starting Point. We were sitting at Orewa Beach, I think. It was actually quite a windy and cold day, and we just had a cup of coffee, and she just randomly threw it into the conversation, and she said, hey, I was chatting with my auntie who's sitting down here in the front, and she said, I've realised that I was totally overthinking faith, that faith is simple and faith is just Jesus. And that is something that struck with me this whole time we've been studying. Sorry. But it's been an absolute privilege to journey alongside with you as you discover who you are, who Christ created you to be, and who He's called you to be. And it's even more of an incredible blessing that you're now part of team here with us, doing exactly what He's called you to do. I'm super honoured to be standing here. I'm super blessed by you and always inspired by you and your faith. And it reminds me just how simple faith is.
Well, the first time I really had much to do with Ayla. Some of the boys in number 11, Chevelle, said, "Oh, we're going to get a good feed tonight." And I says, "And why is this?" And they says, "Oh, Harley's girlfriend's over and she takes over the kitchen, she cooks a mean feed." But as I got to know Ayla, I see a beautiful person. And I see someone who actually, before she came to Gracegate, already was following Jesus Christ. And it's so exciting to see now that she's part of the children's ministry. And I know that she'll lead out and she will just be such an asset here at Gracegate. I'd like to pray at this time for Ayla. If you just move for a little. Dear Lord Jesus, I ask that you be with Ayla, and thank you for her making it public today that she wants to be a follower of you. And Lord, I ask that you be with her as she helps others, and she has such a beautiful heart and always reaching out, going the extra mile, Lord. And I just thank you for Ayla to be part here of Gracegate. And so, Ayla, today, Shay and myself, as followers of the Lord Jesus Christ, baptize you in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost.